Okay. I was given my marching orders and told that we're short on time, so I really do need to move through the slides, but I'm going to speculate that the reason you found it to be enjoyable is because you got to get up and move, you got to talk with different groups, you became an expert in a particular area, it focused you and it focused your group in a variety of different ways, and it allowed you to be much more involved. It's a much more active process. Now, a teacher, if and when you do this, there was excellent feedback that I received, even from the administration as we were doing this. You might want to do, maybe I took too much of a liberty because we have adults in the room, and so I didn't provide you with guide questions that should have happened. I usually do that, and I didn't in this case. I don't remember, I think this was actually a late addition to the presentation, and so I didn't do that. But a few guide questions would have been helpful because you know what it is that you're asking the students to do. You're not just putting them there and saying, here's your information. But let's say, for example, I was doing a cooperative session on, it's an election year, and you have the 4 presidential candidates, just for argument's sake. And so there's A, B, C, D, 4 different candidates. I want certain information. They have to distill it from the reading, and then they have to share it with their group. That type of idea. Okay, so formative and summative, let's go right into the definitions. A formative assessment, you can see here the definition. You should now have this all in your PowerPoint. It is a little bit blended in. It's not the top page. You have to go past the first presentation. Please hold on to this, by the way, you're going to need it later. You should find one that looks a little bit more grayish, like the one that I'm holding up. Everybody see it? It's on page, well, it says it's page 1 because it's really a different PowerPoint. So it's not really that helpful. But if you flip through a little bit, you should see a page that looks like this. Everybody with me? Okay? So, I'm sure I can call on a member of the one team to help us with this, but again, because of time, I'm going to run through it. A formative assessment is an assessment that we do as we go. It's an assessment that we do. It's formative means it's at the front end, if you will, of the educational process. Too often, we think of assessment as I teach, whatever my content might be. Let's say I'm teaching for a week, for 2 weeks, and the unit ends with a test. Then the unit is over, and I move on to the next piece of information. How much I loop back, it's a different conversation. But I have my one almighty assessment on the back end of this unit. It usually counts for a lot, and that's what much of the grade is based on. That's often, not saying it's necessarily how it's done here, but it's often done that way. And that's something that I think we may want to reconsider for a variety of reasons. First of all, it puts a lot of pressure on a particular moment. Right? We've had days that are better days, we've had days that are lesser days. You might have come into the workshop this morning, maybe not feeling your best, maybe not having gotten a good night's sleep, whatever that factor might be. You may have a certain degree of anxiety when a test is put in front of you. Other factors, maybe you don't do so well when everything is in written verbal format and your modalities really speak to a different context. So a variety of reasons as to why we might want to consider using formative assessment, but the main thing is to give us feedback as we go. Teachers now have a sense, did I teach this the way I thought I taught it? Did the students learn it the way I hoped that they would learn it? And if they did, great. Then I can move on. And sometimes you could pretest. And when you pretest, for example, we all teach certain subjects, I would think more or less, at least in Limudei Kodesh, year over year. That might be the halachos of the Yomim Tovim. That might be some other areas that every year you're going to reintroduce that. You may choose to give them a pretest. Well, what do they already know? And how much of this have they already mastered? And this way, you don't have to reteach it. You can move on to something new. You can teach the same general content, but maybe you'll focus on something specific or an area that they don't know as well. So that's an example, but that's not really what we're talking about over here. Primarily here we're talking about how do I assess as we go? What feedback can I get as we're going through the unit that allows me to see whether they're grasping it or not? Okay? So formative assessment is a planned process in which assessment elicited evidence of student status is used by teachers to adjust their ongoing instructional procedures. What that's saying is, I'm using it to guide me. I'm using it to help me get some feedback, to adjust their current learning, or by students to adjust their current learning tactics. How often do students kind of like just go through that unit and maybe they're not sure if they're getting it clearly. They don't really have a good mechanism to get feedback from the teacher or from themselves, and then they get this feedback through that process. Yes?
What you're saying is very important, and there, let's say, are ways, but we're talking an idealistic world. We have 3.5 hours to teach English to get our whole curriculum in. It's very pressured. So let's say you can ask a kid in math to go up to the board, ask a few children and see if they have mastered it. It's very hard to delve into what you're saying when it's just not.
So, every person here teaches something different. It would be hard to give too many specific examples. However, I'm not sure what aspect of English you teach.
Well, first grade.
Oh, okay, all subjects. I got it. Okay. So depending on the topic area, even, for example, giving them a worksheet, having them do that worksheet in class or starting it in class. Let's say, for example, you're teaching math. And you have 20 problems on the math sheet, and you want them to do that partially in class, partially at home, all in class, whatever your particular approach might be. Giving them the opportunity to do 3 or 4 questions, either by themselves, in a paired environment, or maybe even in a cooperative environment, again, depending on what it is that you want them to do, will give you feedback. And you'll be able to see, did they master the addition problems that I gave them? Or did they not? That tells me I got to reteach it. That tells me they've mastered it. And that's great feedback for you. It doesn't take a lot of time. I think one of the things that we get nervous about when we talk about assessment is we think, oh my goodness, it's going to take over my class, it's going to force me to completely change how we operate. It's really not true. In many cases, you can do little things very quickly and automatically get the feedback that you want. That's going to tell you, right? If you're comparing now, if you're distinguishing between nouns and verbs, just for argument's sake, and you give them a list and they have to identify that in your presence, or maybe you're going to do, okay, everybody, if it's a noun, thumbs up. If it's a verb, thumbs down. Or a noun is 1 and a verb is 2. I don't know if any of you use that, but this is actually a great way. It's called active response. It's checking for understanding. You're getting that feedback right away, and you're able to survey the room, and they put it in front of them. This, by the way, is very important as part of the technique. You put it in front of them so nobody sees what they're putting. Because I remember when I was in 6th grade, we had really, a few really smart kids in the class. And the Rebbe asked a question, I don't remember what it was, and one kid, it was kind of like one answer was being given as they were going around the table. It was like sort of in a U shape, and we got to this really smart kid, and he changed the answer, and you notice the entire rest of the group started going this way. And it's kind of like based on Ash's research on how we impact one another in a social sense, and that we're so influenced by each other that we'll often give what we think is the wrong answer just to fit in, so to speak, with the class. So if everybody goes like this, the other people behind them see it. You ever see the kids go like this, where they're raising their hand and they're looking for either approval or kind of like confirmation? By putting it here, then nobody sees it, but you have it and you get the feedback. So the teacher can easily survey the room and is able to see what's going on. So that's really important feedback. Those are examples of checking for understanding. That's a formative assessment tool. It takes seconds, literally seconds. There was a hand over here. Please.
I'm not sure that I understand the last part of your, well, it's not this slide.
The previous slide?
Where it's, yes, the previous one. Where
Go ahead.
That students would adjust their current learning tactics. If a child is a little confused and has lost their way in what's being taught, how would the student automatically adjust their current learning tactics?
So the terminology I can see where it's a little bit ambiguous. I think the intent, because I took this out of a larger piece, is that it gives students feedback, which is the main thing we want. It gives students a sense of, are we getting it? Too often, we don't know that we've mastered it until it's time to demonstrate it for real. That's the issue. How do we give the students feedback as they go so that they know that they're on the right track or not on the right track?
Right, but my point would be that children are often, whether young or old, too embarrassed to raise their hand and say, gee, I really don't get it. Could you explain this in a different way so I can understand better?
Right.
That's kind of what it's
They're not going to say that. I agree. They're not going to say that. But you'll get that feedback and you'll go over to them and you'll help them with it. Or you'll maybe make up a little bit of time with them and you can say, I see that it wasn't clear. How can I make it more clear? Something along those lines.
So you know that they're not understanding.
Right.
How is it that the procedure by which a student would adjust their
So probably for older students, you'll see more of that. Older students will be more confident. They'll be more willing to step forward and say, I really didn't get it, can you please explain it to me? I had students who were a little bit older who were certainly willing to do that. And they want good grades. They want to succeed. They want that satisfaction. They want that fulfillment. They want to please their parents and others. They'll come to you. The younger students may not. You may have to go to them. But the point is, it's giving you feedback as you go. Okay, we're going to really rush through it again because time is short. Summative assessment in a nutshell is what we typically do, which is where we put most of the assessment on the back end, usually in the form of a test, sometimes in the form of a project. Okay? The difference between the two is that one is ongoing and low stakes, one is high stakes and on the back end. Those are just from the side of definition. I want to thank everyone from Group 1 for helping me with that. I'm sorry I couldn't give you the opportunity to share it on your own. Okay? Examples. So there are a variety of examples here on the screen. You have it in your notes as well. I did have this conversation with some of the members of the group that was learning this. Again, a simple graphic organizer. You want to see, do they understand the difference between, let's say, I'm going to demonstrate my ignorance here. Let's say mammals and reptiles, okay? Or is that a bad example already? Is one a subset of the other? Okay, whatever it is. Two different segments within the animal kingdom, just for argument's sake. So you put a Venn diagram in front of them. Okay, a Venn diagram, for those of you who don't know, you will get this because we're not going to have a chance in this session at least to go through it. This is what a Venn diagram looks like. You probably have all seen it. It's where you put information about one on one end, you put distinct or unique information about the other on the other end, and in the middle you talk about where they're similar. Okay? A 5-minute assignment, giving them Rashi and Ramban, right? Rav and Shmuel, teaching Gemara. But anytime where Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, or whatever it might be, where there is machlokas, where there's disagreement, where there are differences in categorization, that's where a Venn diagram could be helpful. There are many examples of graphic organizers that could be used for the purpose of giving you quick feedback on what the students have mastered. I look at it, I collect it, okay? And this way I know where we're going with it. We're going to talk about, actually we're not going to talk about it, but I'll mention now because it's a really great idea. It's so underutilized and it really should be used more. It's called a 1-minute paper. A 1-minute paper is something that you could do at the end of your class where you could say, tell me the 2 most important ideas that we learned today. And then the second question would be, what area requires additional clarification? Or maybe, what did you really enjoy about today's class? Questions like that, a couple of them. They could be anonymous, but you really want to encourage them to put their names there so you can give them direct feedback. They give it to you at the end of the class, you look it over at home, you give it back to them the next morning, and you give them some feedback. And maybe you say, oh, I saw this was unclear to some people, this could have used a little bit more detail, and you begin your lesson with that information. That's another example of formative assessment and checking for understanding. So these are all very valuable examples of that. And of course, here's a list on the right side of classic summative approaches that we use. Here are the graphic organizers. Okay, many of them, how we rank things. This is really neat, by the way. What we know, what we want to find out, what we learned, right? Going into the process and what do I already know? What I already have. I'm going to give out these packets a little bit later, because time is short, but there are a lot, and a lot of them are very intuitive, and they're very easy for you to utilize. So you go into the class, what do I know about Abraham Lincoln? What do I know about fish? What do I know about Har Sinai? Right? I have that information up front. We brainstorm together. Put that information on our graphic organizer. What do we want to learn about Har Sinai? We want to know how long Klal Yisrael was there for, what actually occurred, what was the historical sequence, whatever those questions might be. And then when we're done, we say, well, what did we learn? What do we now know that we didn't know before? And that's a great way of monitoring progress as we go. Okay, other examples, you want to use a problem solution outline. You could use this for certain literature. If the literature introduces a problem at the beginning, or you have some other thing that has a problem that we need to solve, let's say a question in science, and we want to use certain experiments by which to solve that issue or learn how to solve it. And of course the Venn diagram, which we talked about before. Uses,